Hello, beautiful soul. It is Anne at MamaFuel, and here with another episode of amazing conversation with an exquisite mama whose trajectory and journey through life and profession seems to be particularly poignant and important right now. My guest this episode is Samaria Williams, who is a mama of a beautiful little girl, an independent, fiercely loving, incredibly caring, and hella brave woman who, together with her partner, has made some possibly unexpected decisions around raising their daughter, around living their life, and around their partnership. I loved this conversation with Samaria around the power of story and how it can shape our lives. And in the context of our current container of the coronavirus, I feel that this conversation may spark some interesting conversations and maybe musings within yourself and within the relationships that you cherish the most. I hope that you enjoy this. And as a gentle reminder, if you're struggling to put yourself first in any way or find any time for yourself, head over to mamafuel.me/5 ways and you can download a really quick guide that I created for you. I say quick, brief guide that I created for you, because who has time to read a bajillion pages of anything, to help you find the permission and ways to take gentle, loving care of yourself. I'd love to know how that's going, so I'll tell you after the episode how you can let me know. Enjoy. Hello, and welcome to this week's episode of MamaFuel, the podcast. This is Anne, and I am excited to be sharing a conversation with you that has been in my heart with a little pin in it, waiting to happen for months and months and months, because Samaria, who is my guest today, and I met a few years ago now in the container of a beautiful group run by Elena Lipson, who was a guest earlier on the podcast, and I'll link in the show notes to our conversation. And she was our divine self-care mentor, and Samaria and I were part of a small group of women who were really on this journey learning how to love ourselves actively and show up for ourselves and fulfill divine promises to ourselves. And that was an awesome time and has left what feels to me like a really special bond with quite a few of the women in that circle. So Samaria, I'm grateful that you are willing to reconnect in this way on the record, and that we can share this conversation with everyone. So welcome.
Thank you. I'm so happy to be here.
It's lovely to see your beautiful face and to hear your voice again. So tell us a little bit about what your life looks like right now as context for our conversation, because I'm excited about getting into all the goodies. Tell us.
Sure. So currently, my family and I have relocated from Pennsylvania to Florida. I have an 8-year-old princess girl. My partner and I have reconciled, and we're going to be getting married soon, so that's exciting. I am taking a bit of a break from my psychotherapy, clients. I'm a licensed psychotherapist, and I usually have worked in agencies and organizations advocating for vulnerable people. And I have a small private practice, and I'm growing my online coaching practice. But I have taken a break from kind of growing that and ramping it up to get things settled here and to be with family and to reintegrate with that. And I've had some chronic health challenges that kind of flared up with the move and even before that, really. So taking some time to really ground into some divine self-care, but I'm ready to get back into that flow and to share more of my work with the world and continue balancing all of these balls that we as women balance with life and work and mamahood and business and our own beingness. There are a lot of balls in the air.
Yeah, definitely. And I love that you have moved to Florida before the Pennsylvania winter kicked in, which feels like a really strategically smart move.
It was.
Yay for you, and how beautiful that you and your partner have reconciled after some time apart, and that you and your little girl's dad and she are forming a family under the same roof again. That is very beautiful and takes us right into the first thing that I would love to ask you. And that, on the heels of a conversation I had last week with Krista Couture, who is also a beautiful podcast guest. We were talking about stories and the power of story, and how we all have stories that we tell about ourselves and that we tell other people about us, and stories we tell ourselves around what's possible and what the world is offering to us and what is available to us as women, mothers, single people, partnered people, straight people, gay people, children, adults, professionals, you name it, whatever the thing is. And I would love to know, you just mentioned a narrative that has shifted significantly, because when we first met, you were on your own with your daughter and you were navigating the like shared parenting and all of the things and the fragmenting of your family and figuring out how that all worked. And that was a story that remained with me. And I'm going to refer back to a conversation that I had with Lizzie Rosinko. I can't remember the number of her episode. It's in the 50s somewhere, but I'll link to that as well. And at one point in our conversation, she was saying how it's fascinating when you meet somebody that you're left with a certain imprint from that person at the time that you meet them. And you feel like you know them in that time, right? Depending on how deep the conversation and intersection can go.
Mm-hmm.
But then what you don't know is all of the things about that person before. And you don't know how all of those things evolve after. So you feel like you have a knowing of a person, more or less deep, depending on your interactions. And yet you only have a knowing in that moment in as far as they're willing to share. And so talk to me a little bit about how your shifts in family configuration over the last, say, 6 years have had an effect on the stories that you tell. And I don't mean story in the sense of something you've made up, but I mean story in the sense of the way that you relate your situation, your circumstances to other people, and how has that narrative shifted, and how has it taken, like, how have you adjusted to that? Because those are some really big shifts that require adjusting in both directions, right?
They were big shifts. I mean, it's a lovely question. So for me, for a long time when I was younger, I wasn't for sure if I wanted to be married. I knew that I wanted to be a mama. But I wasn't for sure about the relationship part. And so I struggled with that because I have a traditional Christian background, down home family values. I grew up in the South. And so I had to struggle with that a lot as I got older and found more of myself and my truth. And so, my partner and I fell in love quickly. Everything was kind of quick. And so within 2 years, we were pregnant with our daughter, and very happy about that. But both came from some single parent homes that were a bit chaotic. And so we had this trauma narrative individually and collectively that we did not have the tools or support to navigate. And so when the pregnancy happened and the birth happened, and it was so much. And for me, traumatic memories of my own childhood trauma really came back. And of course, at the time, I did not have the tools and support to kind of deal with that. And so this already vulnerable structure, if you will, kind of began to crumble even more. And at the time, the story I think I was telling myself was, my mom did it by herself, and I can too. And I don't know if I have the bandwidth right now to invest in this relationship. I think it's taken all of my might to stay sane, to mother this child, and to be in the world, And so again, I think one of the other stories was really this kind of lone ranger, like isolation as a badge. There wasn't at the time in my life a community of women that I could kind of go to that were further along in their wise woman journey, who could give me more of a feedback about relationships and how when you birth a child and so many things can come up for women. I didn't have that support. And so I really think that one of the underlying stories for in my life, limiting stories, has been, I can do it by myself. I can do it all by myself. And so that began to reflect in my life. And I have been through lots of therapy on my own, and lots of healing supports are now in my life and are in his. And I can look back and see how both of our narratives were kind of feeding the other. But when I embraced single parenthood, and I don't love the word single because he's always been supportive, always been very active in our daughter's life. And we wanted very much to be kind of a holistic co-parenting family, and to have shared birthday parties and shared Christmases, and so that she wouldn't have to keep choosing where she would go. And when we separated, she was about 2, and so it was hard for me to be away from her, of course. And we also didn't want her to have this fragmented part of her psyche that we both feel like we had, because both of our fathers were absent from the very beginning, really, maybe 2 or 3. Both of our dads were out of our life completely. And so we did not want that for her. And one of the stories that we kind of created was that we can choose to consciously parent her. And we got a lot of kind of, feedback from that, from family and friends, some who were really advocating for it. Some were really, you need better boundaries, you need, and so I had to really deal with the story of like, how am I going to consciously create the life that I want based on these cards that I have right now. Some I chose, some I did not definitely choose, but how am I going to consciously create this? And so I had to really kind of narrate that. And then I think when we spent years healing and parenting her and growing and changing, I think when the conversation kind of came up about reconciliation, there was a story of like, does this really happen? Like, we really are 2 different people now. Is this even realistic? And I think for me, he has shared that sometimes it's like, well, is it going to be the same? Or we're going to have the same problems that we had before? Like, do people really do this? And so it kind of became the story of like, is this really even real? Versus like, are we making up this fairy tale about how it could be? And so there was this more soul searching and kind of reconditioning, repairing, honestly, just some of those narratives that some people mention, like, once something's over, it should be over. You shouldn't go back. You shouldn't try to rebuild something that's fractured. There were kind of these kind of cultural stories that weren't so loud, but definitely present enough for me to look at. But ultimately, I had done enough work to trust my own gut and intuition and my own truth in knowing for us what we needed to discuss and talk about and what was true for me. Because I have learned, if nothing else, you can't live your life for other people, for sure. And you also can't wait for someone else's validation, especially, people who are not in your everyday life. They don't know the entire ins and outs. I didn't want that to feed my storyteller, my ego, because we're all human and we have that. But I for sure wanted to challenge some of the stories both ways, just to see what was the highest truth versus what was kind of more just like chatter.
How did you tell the difference between chatter and higher truth? How do you differentiate? But this is such a horrible phrase to use, between the fake news and the true knowing, and learn to trust that again, right? Like, how did you do that?
It is fake news. I feel like our ego is feeding us fake news all the time. So much of it, I believe, is, for me, asking myself, what is the fear speaking? What is the fear talking? And what does my soul know to be true? Even if it's a question, even if it's like a possibility or a wonder, but what is pointing me towards the light and what is rooted in fear?
Where does that live in your body? Like, is that an embodied sense for you?
It is. Usually my solar plexus is really kind of where that lives. And I know for sure what is fear and what is my ego. I had an extraordinarily difficult childhood, loads of childhood trauma and loads of just the developmental trauma. And so much of that kind of fueled me not knowing I could truly trust myself, but trusting myself enough to get to like each higher level of safety. And so I had done all this work on myself around, relationships and divine feminine and divine masculine. And I had dug deep into excavating my own stories around, for so much, men didn't feel safe, relationships didn't feel safe, family didn't feel safe. And I was able to kind of excavate those stories to know what is actually the scared part of me, the younger part of me that feels scared, and which is valid, but is in one hand, and what's actually the story present day that I can look at, objectively. It became like a process.
Yeah, and a practice, right? Like
Yes.
that's so much of what we learned with Elena around divine self-care being really a gentle, loving commitment to practicing those things that start to shift some of the story, some of the weight, some of the physical and metaphorical,
Yes.
Some of the constraints that we may have put on ourselves as children to keep ourselves safe. And this is something that I'd love to dive into with you, because you have both perspectives, or two perspectives. I'm sure you have more, but two perspectives that I'm curious about. One is the perspective of the child who is growing up in a very chaotic environment with loads of trauma, developmental trauma, and I'm sure all kinds of other traumas. The absence of half of the parenting team, no healthy, loving, committed, mutually supportive relationship to map a route for you as an adult. What stories do you remember? What narrative do you remember, or have you observed developing as a child that served you and kept you safe when you were little, and as you move on proved to be no longer helpful? And I'm just going to take a reality check pause here and acknowledge that one of my kids is on holiday. The other one is about to be on holiday tomorrow. And I can hear them singing Christmas carols at the absolute top of their lungs upstairs, like top of their lungs, and your daughter's homesick. So if everyone listening, if you hear some commotion and cacophony on certainly this end of things, it is because I have a very generously voiced child who is very excited about being on holiday from tomorrow. And it sounds like they're being very silly with daddy. And you have a sweet little lamb who's homesick from school, who's trying really hard to not come and interrupt you for a whole hour. And that's hard when you're 8 and feeling crummy. So everyone listening understands both of those scenarios. So
Mamahood.
Yeah, it's reality, right? It's real life. So, okay, so let's come back to that question of the narratives that served you, the strategies that you developed as a child. There's, on the one hand, there's the strategy, but also to me, there is this piece around what were the stories that you were telling yourself? Like, what was possible? What was safe, what wasn't, and then how has that evolved now that you're a mom and you're creating safe and possible for your daughter super mindfully and counterculturally, because you have decided to recreate something completely new from the ashes of what was before. That's not like, that is a ballsy move for both of you to step back, step towards one another, but decide to do it in a completely different way when you haven't got these like super awesome models of glowingly healthy parental relationships.
It's so true. And it's so complex. I think growing up, I grew up kind of, mid 80s. And so there was very much, I think, in African American culture, this idea of like raising strong, independent women that could take care of themselves despite whether they married or not. And I think for my mom, she had been a widow early in her 20s and paired with my own father, and that was proven to be tumultuous at best. I think for me, the overarching theme was that you can live successful in life kind of by yourself. And if you choose to have children, you very well may be raising them by yourself and kind of get comfortable with that. And I think that for me, subconsciously, it became kind of a paradigm of like, maybe it's just easier to do life by yourself. Like it was the message that I had heard, literally since 4 or 5 years old, kind of repeatedly. And I just felt like maybe this might just be easier. I don't think I ever voiced it or even examined it much. But it very was like an underlying message that was predominant and constant. I think the other message for sure was that you don't really need a man to be whole and complete, which is on the surface valid. But I think that my mom was very much in her own masculine energy. And I think that when we do not have a healthy balance of yin and yang, masculine and feminine, we can take what might be a healthy message, if it's balanced, to one extreme or the other. That manifested for me as be super productive, be super successful, aka burn yourself out trying to prove that you're as good as anybody else. And when I fell in love, I did not understand attachment styles and kind of how that works. I had not entered graduate school yet for psychotherapy, and I didn't realize that we are really kind of replaying our childhood and attachment style and kind of how our parents communicated until we can look at it and challenge it and determine what's healthy, what is okay to keep, and what needs to be redesigned. For me, I can completely relate to this idea of needing to prove something, but not being sure who I was proving it to. It became just this way of life of like, well, I'm independent and I can live life on my own. And it didn't dawn on me, but do you want to? Could there be this option of like, yes, you can do it. You've proven to yourself that you can do it, but you have the option of not wanting to live life on your own, and you can be within a healthy family dynamic, which is totally foreign to me. And I think community is so important when we journey through life, because I think that for women, when we have people who can speak into our lives about different perspectives, we can challenge some of these beliefs and stories that we're telling ourselves. Because sometimes for me, I didn't realize I was telling the story until I looked at my life and was like, well, this is not what I'm wanting. So what are the stories I'm telling myself? I definitely felt like I had a misconstrued idea of family for sure. You hit the nail on the head when you said when you come from a chaotic background, it doesn't even seem all of that chaotic until you start to talk with people and engage with people that you trust and realize this was really chaotic. Like this is not how the rest of the world lived. And I think my mom definitely is resilient and has found her way in so many ways. But when I was younger, she struggled a lot with addiction and mental health issues. And I think because as a young child, you get so used to the chaos of that, I kind of internalized that and felt like, well, maybe everyone's this way. And so to protect myself, I will not let anyone get too close because they might very well leave, or they may need so much of me that there's not much of me left. So as a defensive mechanism, I will keep everyone kind of at bay. And that worked for a long time until I became a mama. And once you become a mama, I realized I had a very definite moment of being home alone with her. She was about 6 months old, and she leaned in to give me a hug, and she startled me. And at this time, I hadn't been receiving trauma support services for my history, for what was coming up for me. And I had this like PTSD kind of flash of like just freezing in that moment. And I realized that I had a gate around myself, metaphorically, I feel like even in reality, but that gate kept her out. And I loved her so much. I wanted to let her in, but it was a conscious decision of like, I need to get some help to lower this gate so that she can come in, because it was like cement. It was not going anywhere.
Wow.
And it had been such a safe, friend for me for so long, but she could not get through that gate. And it was very conscious in me saying the story of I can make it just fine on my own was shattered when I had my daughter.
I've often heard that the children who are born to us are the children that we need in order to evolve and grow to the next level. And it sounds like, it's definitely up to each individual to accept the invitation or not. And it sounds like you seized the opportunity to take that invitation, and reading and rewriting new stories that we've never seen is super exciting. And when we're knitting that new narrative and that new story together with our own life, the stakes are super high, right? Like, it's about the stakes of your relationship with your daughter. It's the stakes of, do I want to be the one who does all the things, or am I willing and able to accept support? And then if you do accept support, how do you do that without losing yourself in it? And that's something that I have been grappling with, because I came from a home with a huge amount of love. Our parents adored us, particularly my mom was able to express it. And it was very calm compared to the childhood that you described, but it was not a childhood in which I saw two fully happy, well-matched, devoted adults at all. And neither did my husband. And we will sometimes have conversations around like, I don't know how to do this. I don't know, in this space that we're in right now, like, here are all of the tensions around, and we've had struggles with mental illness. He has suffered through periods of depression. Anxiety has been a companion of mine for a long time and feels like it's releasing its grasp now. And there have been other big issues and events in our life together in the 15 years we've been together. And sometimes I will say, like, I don't know how to do this. And I don't think, like, we're flying blind here. Nobody here knows how to do this, because we don't have this, this pattern or this model to build something healthier on than what we grew up with. And it's super easy, because it's familiar, to fall back on those patterns of what we have seen. Even if we're falling back on them kicking and screaming, we don't even realize we're doing it until we're there. And then you think, oh gosh, how did we get here? And what is this about? And this isn't what we wanted to build. And I just think it's really beautiful that you were able to allow your daughter to help you take that first step towards getting the help and finding the community and the support. Because you're right. I have heard, well, you're right. I confirm, it's not a question of right or wrong. I confirm that in my experience working with mamas, and also my own, that there is that twisted badge of pseudo honor around being able to handle it all on your own. And there's an accompanying sense of abject failure when your system just collapses, because it is not possible for most of us to healthily do it on our own. It is possible to do it on your own, for sure. I question how mentally healthy and physically well one can be parenting, mothering or fathering completely alone and not accepting any help.
I had a wise woman tell me, she said, the reality is being a mama is hard, partnered or not partnered. Like the path is hard. She's like, and nobody tells you that. She's like, if you're navigating parenting amongst yourself and your support system, whether it's family or babysitters or whatever, she's like, that's hard. She's like, but raising kids with someone who has maybe different views and beliefs than you and different histories than you. She's like, that's hard. Like, it's just all freaking hard. And yes. It like freed me so much because I'm like, maybe I'm not doing it wrong. Maybe the journey is just not on flat ground. It's like terrain. I feel like I'm barefoot sometimes in this like jungle walking.
Totally. As you say that, I just had this really vivid image of those, I hate these vehicles, but you know, those massive monster trucks, but with like the kind, I remember my brother having these, like the kind that the four wheels are independent. So like, it's not an axle that they, like the two front wheels move there, like all four of the wheels are somehow, I don't know how the engineering marvels do that, but you know what I mean? Like, you're sort of going over this really uneven terrain and now it's rocks and river and mud and clay and all the stuff, right? And that it is hard, it is challenging, and it is triggering as well, right? Like being a mama is really, really triggering, and it isn't triggering one time. It's triggering so many times at different seasons. And just when you think, that I remember when the kids were smaller, I was like, okay, now I get it. Now we figured out this phase. And then boom, the next day or the next week, we'd be like, wait a second, how are we back at this, in this like inability to hold space for these little beings because they're evolving so fast. And when you have more than one, they're evolving at different rates and then against each other and with each other. And the number of variables are like, oh my God. And then, I think those of us who I've often described that in the first probably 6 years of parenting, built up this glass tower with, those, speaking of the 80s, those glass cubes, like the shower cubes, those big glass shower cubes that people used to have in their bathrooms. I created this like tower, this round tower around myself that was just big enough for me to like stick my elbows out a little bit, but not much more. Like I can't put my arms up or I can't put my arms out. They're just down. And this tower just extended up to the sky. Like it just was, you could see me and I could see you, a little distorted, but I looked like everything was fine inside, outside, but actually inside I was trapped and I wasn't able to ask for help. And the thicker the wall got and the higher it got, the less I could fathom even saying, actually, the narrative I've been telling, the stories that I'm sharing, the version of myself that is being allowed out into the world is not representative of what's going on inside. I don't want to do this by myself. I could really use some help. And I think the higher and thicker those walls, the harder it is to come to a different narrative and to meet people in a different way. And I wonder, both in your professional experience, but also in your personal experience, what's your witnessing of that been?
I hear you, and I definitely can feel that. I believe for me, it was this idea of willingness, this idea of being willing to do it a different way, because I too had seen through the lens of motherhood, this idea of like, there's a fork in the road. I can continue on the path that I'm on, but if I'm really honest, it's not working. It's not working for me. let alone me trying to parent in a conscious way so that
Right.
my daughter will spend less of her life recovering from her childhood and being
Right.
to start off living her limitless life. My therapist has already prepped me and saying all kids will probably grow up and go into therapy, but you want
Totally.
them to have less issues than you had, and you want them to not have to deal with some of these same generational dysfunctional patterns.
Yeah.
And so they will have their own stuff, but not the stuff that you refuse to look at in your own life. And so for me, I definitely feel like it was just a willingness of admitting to myself, I don't want to live this way, because I know what remaining stuck, ignoring the challenges, not dealing with the undercurrent of chaos and dysfunction did to me. And so even though it's a completely different, book for my daughter as far as her childhood, I still wanted to be present. And I quickly learned that to be present as mamas, we have to look in the mirror and deal with our own stuff. And it takes such bravery and courage. I mean, there should be a book, there might be, like, Mothering is Triggering AF, because it is.
Yeah.
And I think you have to be willing to deal with your own stuff. And some days you're just trying to survive, like keeping these little humans alive and well and like nurtured. It's a lot of work. And I quickly learned was, in doing all of that, we are faced with our own little human child, our inner child that needs loving and nurturing and to be in some ways like resuscitated. Like, I don't even think mine was alive. I had to bring her back, and that was a whole process and journey. And I sense the same for you in mothering. I know we have to learn to mother ourselves, and that's not easy. And when I say not easy, I mean hard as F. It really is. I mean, it's hard.
It is. And what you were saying just now, about how, you needed to resuscitate your inner little one. And I would contend that is the case for everybody, bar none. I don't care how idyllic your childhood was. At some stage, we all have bumps in the road. Someone will have said something. You will have had an experience. Oh, see, yawning, even just talking about it, releasing some energy. Something will have come up that your inner little one might not have had the capacity to deal with.
Or support.
Yeah, or the support or the model or whatever it might be, the space. And yeah, it is, not only is motherhood triggering, not only do we need to reparent ourselves, but we also have all this other stuff going on. And my little one has said to me a few times in the last year, like, oh my God, I don't ever want to be an adult. Being an adult is really hard. Like, it's really, oh my God, it's so complicated being a grown up. Why is it so hard? And initially I'm like, oh my God, what am I telling her that, what is she saying that, immediately doubt, blame self. And then I was like, well, no, hang on. I have a relationship with her where I am very forthright. She doesn't know the half of what's going on. But in addition to the stuff that she sees in the mothering sphere, there's all the other layers of all your other selves that come in. Like, you and I have businesses, and if parenting wasn't triggering AF enough, we decided to layer on being an entrepreneur. And
They're like, why not?
Oh my God.
I had no idea.
That is like, because that brings up issues around asking, charging, and what is your value and what is your worth? What is your worth as a human? What is your worth as a mother? What is your worth and potential added value as an entrepreneur? I mean, we could do series and series of podcast conversations on that, you and me together, and we wouldn't need anybody else, although community's good.
Right.
But there are so many layers, right? And all of those layers impact our mothering. And just like you described your childhood, where your mom was struggling with addiction and with mental health. And let's face it, with being a single Black woman raising a child in the Southern US, not an easy environment by any stretch, then, before, or now. And all of these things, they're like, it's not like the pages of a book that are like one at a time that you can turn them and, they're all individual. They're all like intermingled and stuck together, like a weave, right?
Yes.
And they all affect each other. And so there's a complexity to our stories, and they're not static, even though, which is really, really good. And sometimes really, really frustrating, because you think you've got it. You've got the piece of string and you're going to pull it. And then there's another knot, and there's another level of complexity.
Yes.
I would love to know, with yourself today and your inner child and your sweet little one who's just struggling so hard, that she's been so good being, leaving you some space. I can see her popping in and she's like, Mom, I don't feel well. And you're in here talking, and Dad's in there talking, and I'm all by myself, and I'm 8. Come on.
Nailed it.
I'm really curious about the kinds of the narrative that you consciously have with your daughter around what is possible for her, and around what is possible for you as an individual, as a mom, and all of you as a family. I'd love to hear a little bit about, because I know that you're super conscious about how you approach all of it, both because of your training, but also because of the beautiful being that you are. What are some of the narratives that you're consciously seeding or encouraging in her? Because some of the stuff that you share, and I'll share the links to your social media account, it just blows my mind, the stuff that comes out of that little girl's mouth sometimes. So talk to me a little bit about the narratives that you seed with her.
She's a sage by herself, and I have learned to embrace that within her. She is an old soul, but that's just because she is. It's not because she has had to grow up too fast or, any of that. She just is. And so I've learned to embrace it. I think our current narrative really is one day at a time, that we are always, always a family, despite what it looks like, despite where we live or any material things that we have, that we're always, always a family, and that it's okay to try new things and to not be certain of how it's going to turn out. So much of the transition has been, she left friends and school and church and all the things that she's known her entire life. And I really, if I'm honest, underestimated how much of a transition it would be. But I did not make the transition lightly. I definitely knew that as much as it felt selfish, I realized that for me to be my best self and the best mom that I can be, I have to be in a healthy state. And so I have a few chronic illnesses that I think kind of birthed from the chronic stress that I experienced for so many years in childhood. And I do lots of holistic and modern medicine and natural things, natural living and blah, blah, blah. And still every day is different. And so our mantra has kind of become, let's do our best today. And that best can look different. I mean, I was talking to a mentor of mine recently about my daughter who got like an 80, I think, on a spelling test. And I was like, okay, that's good. You did good. And she was like, yeah, I did my best. I think I did great. And so I'm an academic, and so is her dad. And I tried not to put that on her and to keep it like low stress. She is very smart and very intelligent, and I'm very grateful for that. But it was as if she got 100. She was like, I did my best. Like, that was my best for today. And so tomorrow's a different day. And I was just so impacted by that, because I'm like, what if we could do that as adults? That today, Tuesday, this is our best. Maybe it's like 82%. Tomorrow, maybe it's 75, and that's still good. And by the weekend, we might get up to 90, and that's good too. But really to embody the good, better, best, and to not always have the stakes so high about simple things, about mundane things. One of my personal mantras is every day, it's our choice whether we bring the sacred to the mundane. It's a choice that we have to choose. Like, we have to choose joy. if we want to not lose our minds in this life and what's happening in our world right now, despite whatever your story is, right? The climate in the world can be really intense. And so I believe that we have to determine what the narrative of each day, each week, each season is going to be in our own life. And so for me, when it comes to family, I really believe that we have to take each thing as it comes and allow some space for it. I think it's awesome. There's a book, I believe, called Margin, and it talks about how do we create margins in our life, in our time, in our finances, in our relationships, in our schedule. And I really try to live by that from the sense of how can we just create some space for the transition, for what's coming up. Okay, I'm working less and I'm at home more and this is new. And so let's just create some space for that. So she doesn't want to do any extra things right now. No karate and no swimming. Okay, let's just create some space for that. What's this going to look like? How long are we going to allow it to go on? But let's not be so focused on when will she start back. And let's just focus on, so we have this extra family time now. What are we going to do with it? How are we going to make it meaningful? And so I think when we kind of apply that to many areas of our life, and I know many of your listeners are mamas just like us who are facing, tough terrain, some of which we don't even talk about, to other people, but we're facing it. And for me, the way that I get through sometimes really tough days is to think about one day, one moment at a time. How can I bring the sacred to this moment as best I can, always bringing loads of self-compassion and offering up compassion to others.
I could ask you 10 million questions, but I'm conscious of my time and honoring your daughter and your time because she has been hanging out for an hour. So my last question is, where do you get your MamaFuel in the middle of all the things?
Grace is where I get my MamaFuel.
Tell me more.
I believe that grace is the magic that happens in the spaces where we've done all that we can do. We've gone the last mile. We have prayed and meditated and hugged the trees, and things still are not meeting the way they need to meet. And you can look around and see, oh, that thing just worked out somehow. Oh, maybe I can take a step back and be willing to see it from a different perspective. And in a holy instant, we can just see a miracle kind of come out of nowhere. When for me, it's like, I'm ready to be like, I'm done. This is crap. Like, what's happening? How can we fix it? And I just take a step back and allow grace to come through. And sometimes that can be as practical as taking a breath and realizing, most of us in this world are so fortunate to have the problems that we have, to have the kids that we have, to be alive in this moment, even though things are far from perfect. I think that when I can take a look back on that, it can put more MamaFuel in my tank. And some days it's like a fourth of a tank. Like, it's not even half, but it's enough to not be on empty. And then, of course, self-care is like, it's a requirement so that I can be the mom that I want to be and to be the person I want to be, honestly, for everybody and for myself.
I love that. Samaria, thank you so much for talking to me and for sharing your beautiful heart with everybody whose earbuds and speakers we're gracing with our voices right now. I really appreciate you taking the time despite your sweet little one being ill today. I wish you a fantastic holiday season because at time of recording, we're about to go into Christmas 2019. So I hope that it is blessed and warm in Florida and beachy and happy. Although you said you're headed north for Christmas, which is going to be not beachy and warm. It's going to be
beachy and not warm.
Cold and snowy.
Yes, and the same to you. It was a pleasure. We'll have to do it again.
Definitely. Thank you so much. Speak soon.
Yes.
Bye for now.
Bye.
I love that conversation so much. Back when we had it a few months ago, and listening to it again is food for my soul, especially as I listened to Samaria explaining how she and her partner made some decisions around being a part in rebuilding, recreating their family in a really mindful way. It's so important for us to be mindful, and somehow the current situation with the coronavirus seems to have brought everything or many things into perspective. And so I hope that you're able, in the craziness of it all and all of the fear that's swirling around, to take some time to think about how your life is shaped and looking at the moment and where you're making time for yourself. And if you're finding that you're not, particularly as you have all your kids at home and people are afraid and children are overwhelmed, and probably most of us aren't always or at all on our best behavior, whatever that means, finding time to really love yourself and be kind is absolutely critical. So if you haven't yet, head to mamafuel.me/5 ways and download my super brief guide to ways that you can take loving care of yourself. And then come to me via email. Either you can come my email to ann@mamafuel.me or come into our Facebook group and let me know how you've gotten on. Sending you so much love. Stay well. Bye for now. That's it for this episode of MamaFuel, the podcast. Thanks for listening. There's a lot more conversation, sharing, and real mama talk happening in our private Facebook group. To join the virtual village, go to www.mamafuel.me/Facebook. That's MAMAFUEL.me/Facebook. And be sure to say hi when you get there. If you like this episode, or if you know a mama who could use a little mama fuel, and let's face it, we all have times when we're running on fumes, I'd love you to share this episode and to rate it and leave a review. The algorithms work that way. The more reviews there are and the more sharing there is, the more mamas will be able to feel encouraged and supported with the conversations that you just listened to in MamaFuel. Every comment helps, and it's always a super delight to hear from you. Thanks, and bye for now.